The mess hall at Naval Training Command smelled like industrial cleaner and overcooked bacon. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a hard white glare across long metal tables lined with trays and nervous recruits. Boots struck concrete in restless rhythm. Voices overlapped. Laughter bounced off the high ceiling and came back thinner. David Carter moved through it all with a mop and a gray cart that rattled softly over seams in the floor. He did not rush. He did not drift. He moved the way water moves around stone, finding the path that needed him and leaving the rest untouched. His uniform hung plain and unremarkable. His shoulders did not. At the far end of the hall, against the side wall where traffic thinned, Mia Carter sat with a math worksheet and a sharpened pencil. Her backpack rested against her chair. An eagle patch was stitched onto the front pocket, the thread slightly darker than the canvas around it. She worked through fractions in careful silence, occasionally glancing up at the tide of uniforms passing by. Rear Admiral Richard Hale entered at precisely noon. The change was immediate. Recruits straightened without instruction. Conversations thinned into disciplined quiet. Decorations caught the light on his chest. He moved down the center aisle with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to rooms shifting around him. Commander Preston Walsh leaned in near his shoulder, murmuring something that curved Hale's mouth faintly. They stopped near the middle of the hall. Hale's gaze swept the room, cataloging posture and detail the way habit had taught him to do over decades. His eyes landed on David. Then they lingered half a beat longer on Mia. Walsh followed the line of sight. His grin widened. Hale stepped off the aisle and toward the mop. David heard him coming. The rhythm of footsteps on concrete changed. He finished the arc of his stroke, wrung the mop once, and straightened, not snapping to attention, just standing fully upright. "Carter, right?" Hale asked, reading the name stitched over the pocket. "Yes, sir." David's voice was even. No tremor, no extra layer. Walsh chuckled softly. "He's got parade ground posture for a janitorial position." A few recruits laughed. It spread easily. Permission had been granted. Hale let the moment breathe. He looked at David with mild amusement, the kind that assumes compliance. "So, Carter, what was your call sign, Mop Warrior?" The laughter came faster this time. Some recruits laughed because others did. A few officers allowed tight smiles. The sound filled the space between metal tables and bright lights. David did not laugh. He did not look away. He set the cloth from his hand down on the cart slowly, as if placing something fragile back in its drawer. Then, he lifted his eyes and met Hale's gaze directly. "Lone Eagle, sir." The laughter did not fade. It stopped. Not gradually, not awkwardly. It stopped the way a switch cuts current. The hum of the lights became audible again. Somewhere near the ceiling, a ventilation fan ticked once. Walsh's smile faltered at the edges. A recruit in the second row blinked as if unsure what had just shifted. Hale did not pale. He was not a man who went pale. But something in his face tightened, recalibrated. His jaw moved slightly. His breathing shortened by a fraction. He looked at David differently now. Not at the mop, not at the uniform. At the man. Only a few people in the hall understood why the air had changed. One was Hale, one was David. The third, near the doorway, was a senior intelligence officer who had gone very still. Mia watched from the wall. She had seen her father straighten. She had seen the tall, decorated man smile before the room did, and she had seen the smile fade. She tugged lightly at the sleeve of David's uniform. "Daddy," she whispered, "why did that man look scared?" David did not look at Hale when he answered. He reached down and adjusted the collar of Mia's jacket with steady fingers. "Some names carry weight," he said quietly. Hale cleared his throat. The performance register was gone from his voice when he spoke again. "Carter, step outside." It was not barked. It was not theatrical. It was measured. David folded the cloth once and set it neatly on the cart. He looked at Mia. "Stay here. Finish your worksheet." She nodded once, already turning her pencil back to the page, but her eyes followed him until he reached the door. The corridor outside the hall was narrower. The smell shifted from food to chemical cleaner and cooled air. The noise of the mess hall dulled behind the heavy door. Hale stood with his back to the wall. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at David with an expression stripped of audience. You're supposed to be dead. There was no accusation in it, only fact colliding with memory. David held his gaze. Smoke flashed behind his eyes for the briefest second. A desert horizon burning orange, a radio signal cutting to static, heat compressing air into silence. He set the images aside the way he always did. "I didn't die," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I just stopped being useful." The words hung between them. Hale studied him as if comparing him to a photograph in his mind. The years had carved lines into David's face. They had not taken the steadiness from his eyes. Somewhere inside the building, trays clattered. A recruit laughed too loudly at something unrelated. Life went on. In the corridor, it felt like something had shifted beneath the foundation. Hale drew in a slow breath. "Lone Eagle," he repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of it. David did not confirm. He did not deny. He simply stood. The hall behind them resumed its rhythm, but not fully, not the way it had been. A spring had been compressed in that room, and it had just been released. The corridor still smelled faintly of cleaner and cooled air when Hale turned back toward his office. The mess hall door closed behind him with a muted thud. For a moment he stood there, staring at nothing, replaying the way David had said the words. Not defiant, not proud, just factual. Lone Eagle. By the time he reached his office, the base had resumed its rhythm. Boots on concrete, distant commands, the low mechanical hum of a place that believed in its own order. Hale closed the door and locked it. The archive terminal in the corner looked older than the building around it. Thick casing, matte monitor, a physical card slot beneath the keyboard. It required an access card and 2 authentication codes. It also logged less conspicuously than the newer systems layered across the base network. He inserted the card. The screen blinked to life with a dull glow. He entered the first code. Then the second. Access granted. His fingers hovered only briefly before typing the name he had not spoken aloud in years. Operation Iron Talon. The cursor blinked. Processing. The delay stretched past comfort. The fan inside the terminal whirred louder. A thin blue bar advanced slowly across the bottom of the screen. That hesitation was wrong. Archive queries did not stall without reason. When the file finally opened, it did so in sterile order. Mission objective. Classified. Theater. Desert region. Mission status. Failed. Casualties. Total. He scrolled. 6 operators listed. 5 names visible, each followed by KIA. The 6th entry was a solid black bar. Under status, classification level restricted. Joint authorization required. Hale leaned closer. The timestamps caught his attention next. Each operational update was spaced at precise, symmetrical intervals, 60 minutes apart. Every status line structured identically. Engagement ongoing, casualties sustained, extraction delayed, conditions unstable, communications intermittent, copy-paste language, too uniform. Combat reports were never this tidy. They arrived fragmented, contradictory, chaotic. This log looked curated, smoothed. He opened the metadata panel. Several supporting documents were listed, each locked behind elevated clearance tiers. Every link ended the same way. Access denied. He copied the mission window dates onto a legal pad in small, deliberate handwriting. He did not print anything. Paper created trails. Digital logs could be monitored. Handwritten notes lived only where he kept them. He initiated a cross-reference search on oversight authorizations within the same 6-week operational window. Names populated the screen. Authorization adjustments. Classification escalations. Review batches. One name appeared. Then again. Then a third time. Admiral Jonathan Pierce. At the time of Iron Talon, Pierce had been a 2-star in regional oversight. Now he held a Pentagon office 2 floors below the Secretary of Defense. Hale sat back slowly. He remembered signing off on the Iron Talon closure report. It had come in a quarterly batch during a surge cycle. Multiple operations unfolding, urgent briefings, a stack of files requiring signature and trust. He remembered the signature. He did not remember the content. Either he had been deliberately routed away from detail, or he had failed to look closely enough. Neither option was comfortable. He closed the terminal. The room felt quieter than it should have. Across the base, David pushed his cart through the maintenance wing. Sunlight cut through narrow windows, turning the concrete floor into pale strips of gold. The citrus scent of cleaner lingered faintly behind him. His hands worked without hesitation. Supply room first, then East Corridor, then the training wing bathrooms before the lunch cycle. He turned into the supply room and paused. A small dome camera had been mounted above the doorway since his last shift. The casing was clean. New plastic. The angle pointed directly at the shelves where he stored equipment. He stood still for half a second. Then he resumed moving. Cameras were not unusual. Bases upgraded security constantly. Still! He had not seen that one yesterday. When he exited the room, a man in civilian clothes stood near the end of the corridor, studying a clipboard. The man's shoes were polished but not regulation issue. His gaze lifted briefly when David passed. 3 seconds, then away. David did not break stride. Men trained in observation did not stare long. They only needed confirmation. He finished the corridor, adjusted the squeak in his cartwheel with a twist of his wrist, and continued on. Some names carry weight. Weight attracted attention. That evening, the base lights dimmed in sequence as night cycle began. In his apartment 20 minutes away, David waited until Mia was asleep before retrieving a small tin box from the back of a kitchen cabinet. It had once held tea. The lid bore a faint dent near one corner. He set it on the table. For a long moment, he did not open it. Then, he did. Inside lay a slim data drive, its casing scorched along one edge. The burn mark ran like a dark vein through the metal. Beside it, a folded scrap of paper with handwritten numbers, coordinates, authorization strings, fragments of a transmission captured before everything had gone silent. He turned the drive once between his fingers, feeling the shallow ridge where heat had warped it. He had not powered it on in years. Visibility had meant danger. Silence had meant survival. From the bedroom, he could hear the faint whir of Mia's nightlight fan. He closed the tin. Not yet. Back in his office, Hale opened his legal pad again. He circled Pierce's name once. Then beneath it he wrote, Redacted Operator. Uniform timestamps. Access blocked above clearance. He tapped the pen once against the desk. A knock sounded at his door. He slid the legal pad into a drawer before answering. Commander Walsh stood outside, wearing an easy smile. Long day, sir? Walsh asked casually. Hale studied him for a moment. Routine. Yes, Hale said. Routine. Walsh nodded, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the corner of the room toward the archive terminal. Just checking in, sir. Some operations stay archived for a reason. The smile never left his face. Hale held his gaze. Thank you, Commander. Walsh left. The door closed. The hum of the building filled the space again. Hale looked at the terminal. If someone already knew he was looking, then the system was not merely flawed. It was awake. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. If the casualty report was false, then the lie had been engineered. And engineered lies required architects. Outside, the base moved through its structured silence, unaware that something buried for years had begun to shift beneath its foundation. The training floor smelled of rubber mats and metal. Sweat hung in the air, sharp and humid beneath the fluorescent lights. A line of first-cycle recruits moved through conditioning drills with the brittle determination of people who had not yet learned where their limits were. David's cart rolled along the outer wall, its wheel giving a faint squeak every third turn. He kept to the margins, mop moving in slow, controlled strokes across the concrete edge where the mats met bare floor. Commander Blake Thornton stood at center court, voice sharp, posture precise. Again. The recruits dropped and rose in unison. Boots thudded, breath came heavy. A few struggled to keep tempo. David watched without appearing to. You learn to read strain before collapse. You learn to see the tremor before the fall. One recruit, taller than the rest, had been drifting for several minutes. His elbows locked too straight. His breathing thinned instead of deepened. His vision lost focus just slightly between repetitions. David angled his cart closer to the water station. Thornton paced in a clean arc, hands clasped behind his back. He scanned broadly. Authority often scanned broadly. The recruit's arms buckled first. He did not crash dramatically. He folded in stages, as if someone had lowered his internal voltage. Knees hit mat, then shoulder. Breath came shallow and rapid. Thornton glanced over. "Walk it off," he called. "Hydrate. The rest of you keep moving." David was already there. He set the mop aside without hurry and crouched beside the fallen recruit. 2 fingers to the neck, pulse too fast, skin too cool for the heat of the room. "Airway," he said quietly, tilting the chin. "Stay with me." The recruit blinked, disoriented. "Get the medic. Walk fast. Keep your voice level," David added to the nearest trainee without raising his tone. Thornton approached, irritation tightening his expression. "You're a janitor," he said flatly. "Stay in your lane." David did not look up immediately. He counted under his breath, watched the pupils adjust, felt the pulse begin to steady under measured breaths. "Heat stress," he said calmly. "He needs cooling and fluids now." Thornton hesitated half a second too long. The medic arrived within a minute, kneeling opposite David. She confirmed the assessment with efficient movements and signaled for a stretcher. "You caught that early," she murmured under her breath. David rose and retrieved his cart as if nothing unusual had occurred. Across the floor, Thornton watched him with narrowed eyes. A janitor did not check carotid pulse points with that kind of precision. A janitor did not issue triage instructions without thinking. Somewhere in the back of the room, a young recruit with careful eyes watched David longer than the rest. Hale's office phone rang once before stopping. Then again. He answered on the second ring. "Yes." Silence on the other end for 3 seconds, long enough to confirm the line. "Be careful what you dig up," a voice said quietly. "Some records are archived for stability, not secrecy." The call ended. "No introduction, no rank." Hale lowered the receiver slowly. He glanced toward the archive terminal in the corner. The screen was dark, but the sense of presence lingered. He opened his drawer and retrieved the legal pad. Under Pierce's circled name, he wrote one more line. Unprompted contact. If someone already felt the need to caution him, then the ripple had reached further than he expected. In the supply corridor later that afternoon, David noticed the civilian man again. Different clipboard, same shoes. He stood near the doorway to the records annex this time, speaking quietly to a junior administrative officer. The conversation cut short when David's cartwheel squeaked around the corner. The civilian's eyes flicked toward him, measuring. 3 seconds. Then a polite nod. David nodded back once and continued past. He did not alter pace, but he noted the proximity to records. He noted the time of day. He noted that the camera in the supply room had shifted angle slightly. Not much, just enough. That evening, Mia sat at the kitchen table working through reading comprehension. A small lamp cast warm light across the page. Outside, a car engine idled for a few seconds longer than necessary before pulling away. David paused mid-step near the window. He did not look out immediately. When he did, the street was empty. He returned to the table. "Did you know," Mia said without looking up, "that eagles can see 4 times farther than humans?" "Is that right?" he asked. She nodded. "They notice small things." David allowed himself a faint smile. "Yes, they do." After she went to bed, he retrieved the tin box again. This time, he opened it fully. The data drive lay where he had left it. The scorch mark along its edge caught the kitchen light. He unfolded the scrap of paper and studied the strings of numbers. Coordinates. Routing codes. He had not needed to remember them for years, but he had not forgotten them either. He slid the drive into an old laptop he kept offline, its battery long removed. The screen flickered to life with a faint hum. The directory opened. Encrypted folders, labeled by date. He did not access them yet. He only confirmed they were intact. Then he powered the machine down and returned the drive to the tin. Across town, Hale stood alone in his office after dark. He reopened the terminal. This time he accessed a secondary archive tied to Signal's intelligence backup systems that mirrored transmissions but were not part of standard review batches. He entered the Iron Talon operational window. Data logs appeared in dense columns. He filtered for air support coordination. A line surfaced. Support on station. Timestamp aligned with mission distress window. He scrolled further. Authorization adjustment. Coordinates modified. Distance offset 6 kilometers from extraction zone. He froze. That was not weather. That was not interference. That was input. He initiated a trace on the authorization code attached to the adjustment. The system processed. Terminal ID populated. Regional Oversight Office. User authorization. Linked to one profile. Admiral Jonathan Pierce. Hale sat back slowly. The hum of the terminal filled the room. A controlled extraction had been available, and it had been redirected. Not by chaos. By decision. Outside, the base lights dimmed into night cycle. In the quiet kitchen of a small apartment 20 minutes away, David stood by the sink, hands resting on cool porcelain. He felt it now. Not from evidence. Not from proof. From movement. The kind of movement you sensed in terrain before it shifted underfoot. Something buried had begun to surface, and systems that protected it were beginning to stir. The training hall carried the sharp scent of disinfectant layered over sweat. Morning light cut through high windows in pale bands, catching dust in suspension above the mats. The recruits moved in staggered formation across the floor, boots striking in uneven rhythm. David guided his cart along the far wall, the mop gliding in long arcs. He had learned the timing of this room. The noise rose and fell in patterns. Commands landed in clipped bursts. Laughter rarely survived more than a second. Commander Thornton stood at the center, hands behind his back, voice steady and amplified by authority. Push through it. Your body lies to you before it fails you. The recruits dropped and rose in repetition. Breath thickened, shoulders trembled. Some learned to hide it, some did not. David noticed the one on the left edge first. Lean frame, dark hair plastered against his forehead, jaw set tight, determined in the way of someone trying to outrun weakness rather than manage it. The recruit's movements had begun to lose precision. Ankles rolled half a degree inward, elbows locked too hard on descent. Breath came in shallow bursts instead of measured pulls. David shifted his cart closer to the water station without drawing attention to the move. Again, Thornton called. The recruit's hands slipped on the mat. He corrected once. Then his knees hit. He tried to rise again, but the coordination had already gone. His vision unfocused. His body folded slowly to one side, as if someone had cut the internal wiring. A few recruits hesitated. "Walk it off," Thornton said sharply. "Hydrate and rejoin." David was already kneeling. 2 fingers at the carotid artery, pulse rapid and uneven, skin cooling too fast, pupils slow to track. He tilted the recruit's chin gently to open the airway. "Stay with me," he said in a low, steady tone. "Slow your breathing." Thornton approached, irritation tightening his expression. "I said, hydrate," he repeated. "Heat stress," David answered calmly. "Early stage. He needs cooling and monitored fluids now." "You're not medical staff," Thornton snapped. The recruit's eyes rolled briefly before focusing again. "Get the medic," David said to the nearest trainee without looking up. "Walk fast. Keep your voice level." The trainee hesitated only a fraction before moving. Thornton's jaw flexed. "You're a janitor." The word landed flat. David glanced up just once. Not defiant. Not apologetic. Assessing. Then he returned his attention to the recruit's breathing. Across the hall, a few trainees had stopped pretending not to watch. One of them, the same observant young man who had noticed details others missed, tracked the scene carefully. The medic arrived within a minute, dropping to the floor opposite David. Her hands moved with quiet efficiency. She confirmed heat exhaustion with possible escalation. "You caught it early," she murmured, as she signaled for a stretcher. Thornton stepped back, smoothing his posture. "Resume drill," he ordered. The recruits moved again, but their rhythm had shifted. The noise in the room carried a different weight now. David stood, retrieved his cart, and continued along the wall, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Thornton's eyes followed him for several seconds longer than necessary. A janitor did not read vitals like that. A janitor did not manage triage calmly under pressure. Authority did not like unexplained variables. Later that afternoon, David wheeled his cart past the records annex. The civilian man in polished shoes stood near the doorway again, speaking in low tones to a junior staff officer. The conversation ended when David's cart wheels squeaked against the concrete seam. The man's eyes lifted. Measured. 3 seconds. Then a faint nod. David returned the nod and moved on. Inside the supply room, he paused. The camera mounted above the door had shifted again, barely perceptible, but the angle now captured the central shelf more directly. He adjusted the cleaning solution on the cart and continued working. He did not linger. He did not test the lens. Observation was not defeated by confrontation. It was outlasted. In his office, Hale studied the secondary archive logs again. The coordinate offset glowed faintly on the monitor. 6 kilometers. Close enough to appear plausible. Far enough to be fatal. He replayed the sequence in his mind. Distress call. Air support own station. Authorization override. Coordinates altered. User ID confirmed. Pierce. The phone on his desk remained silent. That silence felt deliberate. He opened a new page on his legal pad and wrote one word at the top. Intant. If the extraction had been redirected deliberately, then the question was no longer failure. It was motive. That evening, Mia sat at the kitchen table, pencil tapping lightly against her notebook. The house carried the quiet hum of ordinary life, refrigerator motor, distant traffic, the faint rustle of paper. At school today, she said without looking up, Brittany said her dad knows important secrets. David dried a dish slowly. That so? She nodded. She says important people keep things quiet for a reason. David set the towel down. Sometimes quiet protects people, he said. And sometimes it protects something else. Mia considered that. Eagles don't stay quiet if they see something wrong, she said. No, he agreed softly. They don't. Later, after she slept, David stood by the front window. A Sedan idled at the far end of the block. It remained there longer than casual parking required. Then it drove away without headlights for the first 10 yards. He memorized the plate without appearing to look. He did not call anyone. He did not move. He stood in the darkness until the street returned to stillness. On the training floor the next morning, the recruits whispered about the incident. The fallen trainee had recovered. Word spread that he would be fine. The observant recruit approached David near the water station during cleanup. Sir, he said quietly. David did not look up immediately. I'm not a sir. The recruit nodded. How did you know? David wrung out the mop once and set it back into the bucket. You watch long enough, he said. You see what people are about to do before they do it. The recruit absorbed that. Across the hall, Thornton watched the exchange. His posture remained composed, but his jaw tightened slightly. In institutions built on rank and visible authority, knowledge without title was dangerous. David returned to his cart and moved along the wall. He felt the shift now more clearly. The system was not only observing, it was adjusting, and adjustments rarely stopped at surveillance. The elementary school cafeteria smelled like garlic bread and disinfectant. Plastic trays scraped against tabletops. The noise was bright and careless, the kind that only children could produce without consequence. Mia sat near the middle of a long table, her backpack hooked carefully over the back of her chair. The eagle patch on the front pocket caught the fluorescent light when she shifted. Across from her, Brittany Walsh leaned forward, elbows on the table, expression sharpened by something learned at home. My dad says your dad works for our dads, Brittany said, stretching the word works slightly longer than necessary. He cleans floors on base. 2 other girls paused mid-bite and glanced at Mia. Mia chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and placed her sandwich down on its wrapper. Your dad makes people laugh, she said calmly. Brittany's smile widened. Mine makes people quiet. The words landed without force, without emphasis, just placed there. The girls beside Brittany exchanged a look they did not fully understand. Brittany's smile faltered at the edges, uncertain how to answer something that did not sound defensive. She leaned back and shrugged, feigning disinterest. Whatever. The noise of the cafeteria rose again around them, swallowing the moment. Mia picked up her sandwich and continued eating. When David pulled up outside the school that afternoon, Mia climbed into the passenger seat without comment. The late sun filtered through the windshield in soft gold lines. How was lunch? He asked as they pulled into traffic. Fine, she said. She watched the side mirror for a second longer than necessary. David noticed. At home, he cooked rice and stewed chicken the way his mother had once taught him. The kitchen filled with the warm scent of pepper and simmering broth. Mia set the table with deliberate care, aligning the forks parallel to the edge. They ate in comfortable quiet. Halfway through the meal, Mia spoke without looking up. "If someone laughs at you in front of other people," she said, "is that supposed to make them strong?" David set his fork down. "No. What does it make them?" He considered the question. "Loud." She nodded slightly, processing. At the sink afterward, she dried dishes while he washed. "Brittany says important people keep secrets for good reasons." David rinsed a plate slowly. "Sometimes they do. And sometimes? Sometimes secrets protect the wrong thing." She turned the towel over in her hands. "Eagles don't hide from the sky," she said. "No," he agreed. "They don't." 3 days later, the call came from her teacher. It was brief and polite, a reminder about kindness, a suggestion that children sometimes repeat what they hear without understanding it. David listened without interrupting. "Thank you for letting me know," he said. He did not escalate. He did not call the base. He sat in the break room afterward, hands flat against the metal table. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. He thought about Mia's face at dinner, about the way she had chosen her words carefully. He folded the anger down, the way you fold a map back into its creases. Not denial, containment. He returned to work. That evening, after Mia had gone to sleep, David retrieved the tin box again. The data drive lay where he had left it. The scorch mark caught the low kitchen light like a scar refusing to fade. He unfolded the scrap of paper beside it. Coordinates. Authorization strings. The same numeric patterns Hale had begun tracing through secure archives. He placed the drive into the offline laptop once more. The screen flickered to life. Encrypted folders opened to a directory of captured transmissions. He scrolled through one file just enough to confirm the integrity of the data. A routing string appeared. The code sequence matched the format of contractor channels he had seen years ago. He closed the file without listening further. He powered the machine down. The quiet in the apartment felt heavier tonight. The next morning, as he pushed his cart down the east corridor, the civilian man in polished shoes stood near the exit door. Closer than before. "You're thorough," the man said casually as David approached. David slowed just enough to acknowledge him. "Cleaning requires it." The man smiled faintly. "Everything does." He stepped aside. David continued past, noting the way the man's eyes lingered not on him, but on the cart. Observation was no longer subtle. It was deliberate. At school that afternoon, Mia waited by the bus curb. The air carried the faint sweetness of cut grass. Children scattered toward waiting cars and parents. A gray sedan idled half a block down. Its engine sound did not match the rhythm of pickup traffic. Mia glanced at it once, then again. The driver's window was tinted dark. Mrs. Calloway arrived moments later and waved Mia over. The sedan remained until Mia climbed into the neighbor's car. Then it rolled forward and turned the corner. When David heard about it that evening, he did not interrupt. Mrs. Calloway described the timing carefully. 10 minutes before the bus arrived, left only after Mia was gone. "Thank you for telling me," David said. He ended the call and stood still in the hallway. 30 seconds. He let the anger rise, controlled and measured. Then he exhaled. He walked to Mia's room and listened to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. Later that night, a piece of folded paper slid beneath the apartment door. The sound was almost soft enough to miss. David reached it before Mia stirred. He unfolded it. 4 words, printed in block letters. "You survived once. Don't test fate again." No signature. No mark. He photographed it immediately, placed it in a sealed plastic bag. He did not tear it. He did not react. He stood in the kitchen under the dim overhead light and understood something clearly. This was no longer about a buried report. It was about pressure. Pressure applied quietly. Pressure meant to isolate. They believed he was alone. They believed silence was still his instinct. He looked toward the hallway where Mia slept. That calculation had changed. For himself, he had once chosen quiet. For her, he would choose differently. The base might still hum with routine. The archive logs might still scroll in hidden rooms. But the line had shifted, and someone had just crossed it. The conference room used for internal reviews had no windows and no decoration. The walls were painted a flat, institutional gray that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. A single rectangular table sat beneath fluorescent panels that hummed faintly overhead. The air smelled of paper and recycled ventilation. 5 chairs were occupied. Rear Admiral Hale sat at the head of the table. To his right, Captain Sandra Okafor from Intelligence Liaison. Across from them, 2 officers from Legal Affairs. At the far end, a recorder with a laptop open, screen dimmed low. The door was locked. No one raised their voice. Hale opened a thin folder and slid a copy toward each person present. Operation Iron Talon, he said. Formal internal review request. The phrase carried weight even in that controlled space. One of the legal officers adjusted his glasses. The archive file carries a congressional oversight marker, he said carefully. Opening an inquiry triggers automatic notification to Pentagon Intelligence Oversight. I'm aware, Hale replied. He did not elaborate. Okafor activated the secured presentation terminal. The screen flickered to life with a soft electronic chime. Satellite coordination logs appeared in tight columns of time-stamped entries. These are not primary mission records, she said evenly. They are mirrored transmission logs maintained by a signals intelligence unit outside the operational review batch. She scrolled to the relevant window. At 12:47 hours, distress signal received from Iron Talon team. At 12:48, air support confirmed on station within extraction radius. At 12:53, authorization adjustment entered. Coordinates modified. She highlighted the line in pale blue. Distance offset 6 kilometers from designated extraction zone. One of the legal officers leaned forward slightly. Weather interference? He asked. No, Okafor answered. Transmission stability remained constant. Signal strength was not degraded. This was manual input. She advanced the slide. Authorization code trace. Terminal location. Regional Oversight Office. User credentials assigned during that operational window. The name populated on screen. Admiral Jonathan Pierce. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder for a moment. No one spoke immediately. The recorder's fingers hovered over the keyboard, then resumed typing. The second legal officer cleared his throat. If accurate, that establishes decision authority, not necessarily intent. Hale met his gaze. Intent will require full review, but air support was present, and it was redirected. Okafor nodded once. I have also reviewed contractor routing records tied to the same time frame. She placed a second folder on the table. Shipment waypoints aligned with the operational window. Contractor registration codes match 2 private defense companies awarded expanded contracts within 18 months following the mission closure. Connections? The first legal officer asked. Advisory relationship documented between Pierce and both contractors post-retirement from Field Command. The word advisory hung in the room like something fragile. The recorder stopped typing. This cannot remain base level, the second legal officer said quietly. No, Hale agreed. We elevate. Across the base, Commander Thornton stood in the administrative corridor with his phone pressed to his ear. You didn't tell me this was escalating, he said under his breath. The response on the other end was inaudible. His jaw tightened. You said it was contained. He ended the call abruptly when a junior staff officer turned the corner. Later that afternoon, Thornton entered the records room under the pretext of reviewing training logs. The civilian man in polished shoes stood near the doorway. It's moving faster than expected, Thornton said quietly. It will correct itself, the civilian replied. Pressure creates noise. Noise can be redirected. Thornton's eyes flicked toward the closed office doors lining the hall. And if it isn't? The civilian smiled faintly. Then we remind certain parties of what silence protects. In the maintenance wing, David pushed his cart along the corridor where the camera's angle had shifted days earlier. He sensed the change before he saw it. The civilian man stood at the far end again, not pretending to read anything this time, just watching. David continued past without altering his stride. He had learned long ago that attention did not require acknowledgement. What required acknowledgement was pattern. The pattern now was clear. Surveillance, pressure, containment. He reached the end of the corridor and paused near the exit door. For a brief second, he considered going directly to Hale. Instead, he waited, because timing mattered more than impulse. That evening, Hale received official confirmation. The inquiry had been logged. Notification transmitted to Pentagon oversight. Response expected. The language in the email was procedural and cold, but the subtext was unmistakable. The matter had moved beyond local discretion. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for several seconds. He had anticipated resistance. He had not anticipated how quickly the resistance would organize. The phone rang. He answered. "This is a courtesy call," the voice on the line said smoothly. "You are reopening a classified operation with congressional marker status. That decision carries consequences." "For whom?" Hale asked evenly. "For everyone involved." The line went dead. Hale lowered the receiver. Outside his office window, the base lights flickered on as evening settled. He opened his legal pad again. Under Pierce's name, he added one word: escalation. At home, David sat at the kitchen table with the sealed plastic bag containing the note. "You survived once. Don't test fate again." He placed the tin box beside it. The scorch-marked data drive rested in his palm. He no longer had the luxury of waiting. If the inquiry had formally begun, then those who feared it would act. Silence would not shield Mia. He picked up his phone. The call connected after 2 rings. "Rear Admiral Hale," David said. "We need to talk." There was a pause. "I was about to say the same thing," Hale replied. "Tomorrow. Secure room." David ended the call and looked down the hallway toward Mia's room. Her door was closed. A faint line of yellow light glowed beneath it. He stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Across town, in a secured office lit only by a desk lamp, Admiral Jonathan Pierce read a brief summary forwarded from oversight. "Iron Talon. Internal review initiated." He folded the document once and set it down. For several seconds, he did nothing. Then he reached for his phone. Some things, he believed, could still be managed. But the hum beneath the system had changed. And once that hum shifted, it rarely returned to silence on its own. The legal affairs conference room had no windows and no ambient noise. The air felt dense, conditioned, deliberately neutral. A single overhead light cast a pale wash across the table where 4 people now sat. Rear Admiral Hale, Captain Sandra Okafor, a recorder positioned near the wall, and David Carter. The sealed plastic bag containing the note rested between them. "You survived once. Don't test fate again." Hale read it twice without touching it. "When did this arrive?" he asked. "Last night," David replied. "Slid under my apartment door. No envelope." Okafor adjusted a pair of thin gloves and lifted the bag carefully. "Any signs of forced entry?" she asked. "Not yet," David said. "But there's been surveillance, civilian presence on base, vehicle near my daughter's school." Hale's expression shifted at the last sentence. "You're certain?" David met his gaze. "Yes." There was no hesitation in it. Okafor photographed the note and logged the time. The recorder's keyboard clicked softly. Hale leaned back. The inquiry triggered oversight. That notification would have reached Pierce by now. "And if he's connected to contractor routing," David said quietly, "then this is damage control." Hale nodded once. "What do you have?" he asked. David placed the small tin box on the table. He opened it slowly. Inside, the data drive caught the light, its edge scarred by heat. Okafor inhaled softly. "You kept it." David didn't answer immediately. "I kept what I could carry." Okafor connected the drive to a secured forensic laptop. The device hummed faintly as it mounted. Encrypted directories appeared. She worked methodically, bypassing surface-level encryption through authorized forensic protocol. The screen filled with time-stamped data fragments, routing strings, authorization codes, encrypted transmissions captured during the operational window. She paused at one file and glanced at Hale. "This matches the routing format we traced in contractor logistics." She cross-referenced a code sequence against her secured database. Match confirmed. 14-month routing pattern. Multiple shipment waypoints. Linked contractor identifiers. She looked at Hale again. "This expands the scope." David sat quietly, hands folded. The room felt smaller now. "If this holds up under review," Hale said, "then Iron Talon was not an isolated operational failure. It was part of a revenue stream." Silence followed. The recorder stopped typing for a second before resuming. Okafor sealed the device into an evidence container, affixed a timestamp label, and signed it. "Chain of custody begins now," she said. Hale looked at David. "Once this leaves the base, we lose control of how far it goes." David nodded. "We already lost control when they redirected extraction." The words were not emotional. They were factual. Hale held his gaze. "You understand what happens next?" "Formal testimony," David replied. "Oversight hearing. Pierce will move to contain." Hale did not deny it. "He will attempt classification override. He will question credibility." "He already has," David said quietly. Hale's jaw tightened. "Then we move faster." That afternoon, the base felt different. Not louder, not visibly tense, but conversations shortened in certain corridors. Doors closed more often. Commander Thornton entered the administrative wing with controlled steps, his posture carefully neutral. The civilian man met him near the records annex. "It's going to a hearing," Thornton said under his breath. The civilian's expression did not change. "Then you need to make sure the narrative is prepared." Thornton's eyes flicked toward the training floor. "And if the data surfaces?" The civilian gave a faint smile. "Then the source must appear unstable." In the maintenance corridor, David pushed his cart past the mounted camera. He no longer glanced at it. Surveillance was no longer subtle. It was pressure. A junior recruit approached him quietly near the water station. "Sir." David raised a hand slightly. "Don't call me that." The recruit nodded. "I saw Commander Thornton in the records room last night," he said in a low voice. "After hours. He told someone to lose a file request." David studied him. "Write down what you saw," he said. "Time, location, exact words. Don't share it." The recruit swallowed. "Yes." David nodded once and continued down the corridor. Information had begun to move in more than one direction. That evening, Hale stood alone in his office with the lights dimmed. The oversight office had responded. Formal closed hearings scheduled. Location: Federal building near the Pentagon. Civilian witness required. He read the message twice. His phone vibrated. "Unknown number," he answered. "You are stepping beyond your command lane," the voice said calmly. "I am stepping into it," Hale replied. There was a pause. "This will not end cleanly." Hale's voice did not shift. It already didn't. The line disconnected. He looked toward the city skyline in the distance, faint through the office window. The machinery of oversight had begun turning. And machinery, once engaged, did not stop because someone preferred silence. At home, David stood near the front door. The lock had been worked, clean. No splintered wood, no forced frame. He entered slowly. The air inside carried the faintest disturbance. Paper moved, objects replaced almost exactly as they had been, but not precisely. A folder on his desk sat 2 inches off alignment. A photograph of Mia angled slightly left. Nothing missing. Message delivered. He photographed everything before touching a single object. He did not call the police. He called Hale. "They've escalated," he said quietly. "I expected as much," Hale replied. David walked into Mia's room. She was asleep, one arm thrown above her head, the soft glow of the nightlight casting a narrow stripe of gold across the floor. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. For himself, risk had once been personal. For her, it was unacceptable. He stepped back into the hall and closed her door gently. "Tomorrow," Hale said through the phone, "we formalize everything." David looked down at the sealed evidence container resting in his kitchen. No more waiting. No more containment. The line had been crossed, and once crossed, it could not be redrawn. The maintenance corridor was quieter than usual that morning. The hum of ventilation seemed louder against the polished concrete. David was halfway through the east wing when 2 base security officers stepped into view at the end of the hall. Their pace was measured. Their expressions neutral in the way and wear neutrality when carrying someone else's decision. "Mr. Carter," one of them said as they approached. David rested the mop against the cart. "Yes, we have a complaint alleging unauthorized removal of military property from storage facilities. You need to come with us." The words were procedural, the tone carefully detached. David nodded once. "Of course." He folded the cleaning cloth neatly and placed it on the cart. No sudden movement. No visible resistance. As they walked him through the central training corridor, recruits rotated between sessions. The sound of boots and shouted commands slowed slightly as people noticed the formation. One of the younger recruits, quiet, observant, met David's eyes briefly. David gave nothing away. Near the common area, Mia sat at the end of a long bench with a book open in her lap. It was a teacher development day. She had been allowed to sit quietly while her father worked. She looked up when she saw the two officers flanking him. Her eyes moved from the clipboard to the hand resting lightly near David's elbow. She did not cry. She sat straighter, memorizing. Commander Thornton stood near the entrance to the security office, positioned carefully so that he appeared incidental rather than involved. As David passed, Thornton leaned slightly closer. "You should have stayed dead," he said under his breath. David did not turn his head. He did not slow. The security office door closed behind him with a soft metallic click. Inside, the room smelled faintly of paper and stale coffee. A single camera in the corner blinked red. One officer gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." David complied. The clipboard was placed on the desk. A typed statement outlined the alleged removal of classified equipment, vague in detail, broad in accusation. "Do you wish to make a statement?" the officer asked. David met his gaze. "No." The officer hesitated, then nodded. Before further procedure could begin, the office door opened. Rear Admiral Hale entered without haste. "Release him," Hale said. The two words carried no excess volume. They did not require it. "Sir, the complaint has been reviewed and found without evidentiary foundation. Document the dismissal and file it with my office." The officers exchanged a brief look. "Yes, sir." Hale turned to David. "Come with me." In Hale's office, the door closed with more force than usual. He placed a thick folder on the desk between them. Inside were printed documents reconstructed from independent archival sources. Service records, deployment confirmations, call sign verification, personnel transfers. "Your file was deliberately falsified," Hale said. "We now have chain of custody validation for every correction." David looked down at the top page. His name, his rank, his call sign, Lone Eagle. Hale continued. "The satellite logs, the authorization override, the contractor routing patterns. It has all been forwarded to a military prosecutor operating outside this base's command structure." David exhaled slowly. "The accusation this morning," he said, "wasn't improvisation." "No," Hale agreed. "It was a test, to see if pressure would fracture you." David met his eyes. "It won't." Hale nodded once. "There will be a closed hearing in Washington at the end of the week. Formal testimony. You will be called as a civilian witness." David did not ask for time to think. "I'll be there." Hale studied him for a moment. "They will attempt to undermine credibility. Psychological instability. Trauma narrative." David's voice remained level. "Let them." The hearing room in Washington was smaller than its reputation suggested. Fluorescent lights washed the walls in flat white. A faint smell of recycled air lingered beneath the hum of electronics. 5 panel members sat at a long table. Inspector General representatives, military oversight officials, a Congressional Defense Subcommittee observer. Hale stood to one side in full dress uniform. Okafor organized sealed evidence containers methodically on a secondary table. At the far end, Admiral Jonathan Pierce entered with legal counsel. His posture was composed, his expression calm. He did not look at David immediately. The proceedings began with formal statements and procedural acknowledgments. David testified first. His voice did not waver. He described the mission parameters, the extraction timeline, the satellite device recovered before the ambush, the data transfer. He used precise language, no embellishment. Pierce's counsel listened without interruption. When it was his turn, Pierce spoke with practiced control. He acknowledged the tragedy, the complexity of operational environments, the psychological burden of prolonged isolation. He suggested, gently, that trauma can distort memory, that survivors sometimes construct coherence from chaos. The architecture of doubt was clean and careful. Several panel members leaned back slightly. Pierce paused, then added, "We must consider the possibility of misinterpretation under extreme conditions." Okafor stood. "With permission," she said. She connected a secured playback device. "This is an authenticated signals intelligence recording from the operational window," she said evenly. Voice identification confirmed by independent forensic analysis. She pressed play. The room filled with static for half a second. Then a voice. Calm. Authoritative. Authorize coordinate adjustment. Redirect extraction 6 kilometers east. A second voice asked for confirmation. The first voice responded. They are expendable. Proceed. The word lingered. Expendable. No one in the room moved. Pierce's expression did not collapse. It thinned. Counsel rose immediately. "We request classification of this recording under national security." "Denied," the panel chair said calmly. "Independent copies have been secured with oversight authorities prior to this session." Silence pressed against the walls. Pierce attempted composure again. "The recording lacks contextual framing." "The context is the timestamp," the chair interrupted. "The coordinates, the traceable authorization code." 2 military police officers entered quietly through the rear door. Pierce was not handcuffed. He was simply escorted. Authority left the room slightly ahead of him. Outside the building, the winter air felt colder than it had inside. Garrett, the prosecutor, approached David near the elevator. "What you preserved changed the scope of this," he said quietly. "This extends beyond one operation." David nodded. "It always did." Hale stepped beside him. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. David looked at him without accusation. "I know." They stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut with a soft, mechanical hum. Above them, the city continued moving indifferent and immense. But inside the machinery of oversight, something fundamental had shifted, and it would not return to silence easily. The news cycle moved faster than anyone on base expected. By morning, defense correspondents were using phrases like procurement irregularities and command liability. Headlines avoided conclusions but leaned toward inevitability. A still image from outside the federal building circulated quietly, 2 military police officers flanking a silver-haired man whose expression had not fully registered what the cameras had captured. Inside Naval Training Command, conversations shortened. Doors closed more quickly. Commander Thornton arrived 40 minutes early. His office lights were on before sunrise, casting long, rectangular shadows across the corridor. He sat behind his desk with his phone in his hand, jaw set, eyes tracking the same headline over and over. He had spent most of the night calling contacts who did not return the calls. By 800 hours, he drafted a statement on his personal laptop. It painted David Carter as a disgruntled civilian with a history of instability. It suggested obsession, emotional distortion, a vendetta against the institution that had once employed him. He sent it anonymously to 2 media contacts using a personal account routed through a civilian network he believed was insulated. He leaned back in his chair. Pressure creates noise. Noise can be redirected. At 1100 hours, Garrett's office received the forwarded statement from one of those contacts. The journalist had flagged it immediately. Metadata analysis took less than 15 minutes. The routing trail was not as invisible as Thornton had assumed. At 1320, Internal Affairs received a formal notification from the Judge Advocate General's office. At 1345, 2 officers in plain uniforms entered the administrative wing. Thornton looked up from his desk as they approached. "Commander Blake Thornton," one officer said. "You are being placed under investigation for obstruction of justice and attempted interference with an ongoing federal inquiry." Thornton stood slowly. "This is a misunderstanding." "You can explain that to legal counsel," the officer replied. The civilian man in polished shoes was nowhere in sight. Thornton's hands were not cuffed, but they were guided. The corridor watched without appearing to. By 1400 hours, he was in a vehicle leaving the base. Ethan Brooks heard about it during afternoon formation. The announcement was brief. "Commander Thornton has been relieved pending investigation." That was all. Ethan kept his eyes forward. He had delivered his written notes to Admiral Hale the day before times, locations, exact phrases, overheard in the records annex. He did not feel triumphant. He felt steady. He had seen something wrong and recorded it. Sometimes that was enough. In Washington, the Inspector General's office expanded the scope of the investigation. The contractor routing patterns uncovered from the recovered data device were traced further. Shell companies emerged in layers. Advisory relationships were no longer advisory. Financial distributions aligned with contract award increases in the months following Iron Talon's closure. Pierce had not simply authorized a redirection. He had protected an infrastructure, and he had benefited from it. The evidence chain held. Chain of custody documentation from the moment the device left David's kitchen table to its forensic imaging in a secured facility was airtight, time-stamped, signed, witnessed. Attempts to classify the audio log retroactively failed. Independent oversight copies had already been archived outside military control. The architecture Pierce had relied on to bury truth could not bury digital replication. Collapse did not come in a dramatic crash. It came in increments. Contract reviews suspended. Advisory boards dissolving quietly. Public statements shifting from defense to distance. Pierce was formally charged 2 weeks after the hearing. The indictment language was clinical: fraud, dereliction, obstruction. He did not appear in uniform. Back at the base, a formal letter arrived addressed to David Carter. It was embossed, official. Offer of reinstatement, restoration of rank, commendation ceremony, full benefits reinstated retroactively. Hale found David in the corridor outside the command office. "You should read it carefully," Hale said. David had already read it. "I did." "And?" David looked down the corridor, where recruits moved between sessions with nervous determination. "I didn't fight for medals," he said quietly. "I fought for my men." Hale did not argue. "A ceremony won't change what happened to them," David continued. "Or what didn't." Hale studied him. "What will you do?" David's answer came without hesitation. "Stay." The word surprised Hale more than any refusal might have. "Stay?" "As a janitor." The corner of David's mouth shifted faintly. "Peace is harder to protect than power." Hale nodded once. "Understood." That evening, the base commander issued a brief internal statement, acknowledging the investigation's findings and reaffirming commitment to integrity. It was measured language, institutional, but it was public. For the first time in years, the record of Iron Talon was no longer sealed in silence. In a small apartment 20 minutes from the base, Mia sat cross-legged on the couch with a bowl of cereal balanced carefully in her hands. The television volume was low. A news anchor summarized developments in steady tones. An image flashed briefly across the screen exterior shot of the federal building, winter light gray against stone. 2 figures emerged from the doorway. One in uniform. One in a dark suit. Mia leaned forward. The image was distant, slightly blurred, but the posture was unmistakable. The way he held his shoulders, the way he moved without hurry. "That's my dad," she said quietly. No one else was in the room to hear it. She set the bowl down carefully, rinsed it in the sink, and returned to the couch. She did not smile. She did not cheer. She simply watched until the segment ended. Across town, David stood at the kitchen counter, hands resting lightly on the edge. The day had been long, but it had been clean. The kind of clean that did not come from soap or solvent. It came from truth, no longer buried. He stepped into Mia's room and paused in the doorway. She was asleep, one arm draped across her pillow, the eagle patch on her backpack visible in the dim light. He leaned lightly against the frame. The collapse had not been explosive. It had been methodical, systemic, and final. He turned off the hallway light and walked back toward the kitchen. Some structures fell loudly. Others simply stopped standing. This one had finally done both. The mess hall had been rearranged. Long metal tables were pushed aside to create rows of folding chairs. The fluorescent lights hummed as they always had, but the room felt different, less chaotic, more deliberate. A podium stood at the front, the base insignia mounted behind it. Recruits filled the chairs in pressed uniforms, backs straight, hands resting evenly on their knees. Senior officers stood along the wall in a quiet line. The air carried a faint scent of polish and floor cleaner. David stood near the back, dressed in a simple dark suit. Mia stood beside him, her hand tucked into his. She had insisted on wearing her backpack. The eagle patch faced outward. Rear Admiral Hale stepped to the podium. He did not use prepared notes. 8 months ago, he began, I made a joke in this room at a man's expense. The recruits remained still. I did it because I believed rank defined value. I was wrong. A murmur of ventilation filled the pause. The man I addressed that day carried a name I had signed off as lost. A name erased from a report I failed to examine closely enough. He let the words settle. Everything that followed the inquiry, the hearing, the charges began because he allowed me to discover that failure without spectacle. Hale stepped away from the podium. David Carter, call sign Lone Eagle, your service record is restored in full to this command and to the permanent record of this branch. He raised his right hand in salute. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a recruit in the second row rose to his feet. Another followed. Then another. It was not choreographed, not commanded. It was chosen. Hands lifted to brows in quiet respect. David did not step forward. He did not speak. He stood where he was, holding Mia's hand, receiving the moment without claiming it. Mia looked up at him. He did not smile broadly. He did not bow his head. He simply stood. Afterward, the room loosened. Chairs shifted. Low conversations resumed. Hale approached him near the side wall. "You could come back," he said quietly. Officially, with full rank. David considered the rows of recruits now dispersing, the officers who had watched in measured silence. Then he looked at Mia. "I already came back," he said. Hale nodded once. "Understood." 6 months later, a small rented space in a low-income neighborhood opened its doors on a Saturday morning. The sign outside was simple. No insignia, no rank. Inside, the floors were clean. The scent of fresh paint lingered faintly. East-facing windows let in early light that made dust particles glow like suspended sparks. A row of folding chairs lined one wall. A water cooler hummed softly in the corner. On the far wall hung a rectangular wooden plaque. Lone Eagle. Not forgotten, not broken. 8 kids stood in uneven formation at the center of the room. Ages ranged from 9 to 14. Some shifted nervously. Some stood too rigid. David moved among them with patient precision. "Feet shoulder-width apart," he said gently. "Balance first, strength second." He adjusted a stance, rotated a shoulder slightly, corrected posture without diminishing anyone. He never raised his voice. He never rushed. "Discipline isn't loud," he told them. "It's consistent." Mia sat against the wall with a library book open in her lap. She pretended to read, but her eyes followed the way he moved through the room. He was different here. Not a janitor, not a witness, not a soldier, just steady. After the session ended, one of the younger boys lingered. "Are you really in the military?" he asked hesitantly. David crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "I served," he said. "Did you win?" David considered the question. Sometimes winning is making sure someone else gets home. The boy nodded slowly. "That makes sense." That evening, Mia sat at the kitchen table with a math worksheet spread in front of her. The house smelled faintly of rice and pepper. She worked through 3 problems, then erased one and tried again. When she finished, she set her pencil down and looked at him. "Are you a hero?" The question arrived without drama. David leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, a porch light flicked on across the street. A car passed slowly. He thought about the men whose names had been restored, about the quiet corridor where pressure had once gathered, about the room without windows where evidence had changed direction. "I'm your dad," he said. She studied his face. "That's enough," she decided. She returned to her worksheet. He watched her for a moment longer before clearing the dishes. In the weeks that followed, contract reviews continued. Oversight committees filed recommendations. Policy revisions were drafted. The base returned to routine, but the record had been corrected. Some structures were repaired, others dismantled. In the small rented training room, Saturday mornings filled steadily. Word spread quietly through neighborhoods that needed something steady. David mopped the floor himself before each session began. Mia laughed the first time she saw him do it. "Full circle," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe." Sunlight spilled through the windows, casting long, warm lines across the clean floor. The plaque on the wall caught the light. Not forgotten. Not broken. Outside, the street moved in ordinary rhythm, children riding bicycles, neighbors talking across fences, the distant hum of traffic. Power had once tried to erase a name. It had failed. And in the quiet space between discipline and peace, that name no longer needed to be shouted to be known. Some names carry weight. Some names carry truth. And some names simply refuse to stay buried.